Speaking on this issue feels really timely. We're just over a year on from that episode of Blue Planet 2, which snowballed interest in the marine plastics as an issue and action on it. In the next 5 minutes, I'd like to take you through a wider look at plastic flows from rivers to the sea and suggest that to solve the issue, we need to take a global approach. Plastic inputs to the ocean are a global problem. 2 landmark studies released last year look to understand their sources, pathways, and quantities. The figure on this slide is from one of them. So the countries are shown in a sort of grey scale, and basically the darker the colour, the more mismanaged plastic waste we think is generated there. The blue circles show how much plastic we think is coming out of the rivers, and essentially the bigger the circle, the more plastic input to the ocean. So estimates for the total input of plastic waste from rivers into the ocean stand between 1 and 2.4 million tonnes per year. And I toyed with a few different ways of kind of making that figure a bit more tangible and settled on the equivalent weight of 100,000 to 200,000 buses. So that's every year. One of those studies estimated that 90% of that plastic is coming from just 10 rivers, 8 of which are in Asia. The other one decided it was a slightly more broad spectrum, with 70% of plastic waste coming from 20 rivers, but similar rivers occupied the top spots. And both papers agreed the Yangtze is the #1 river globally contributing to marine plastic pollution. However, it's worth noting that all of the rivers in the dark bounded circle are releasing upwards of 20,000 tonnes of plastic pollution per year. The top 10 look something like this, and a lot of that is flowing through and coming from China. But the key point is that without addressing the issue in these countries, there's no hope of reducing the input to the oceans to zero. And other research suggests that based on our current trajectory, that problem is only going to intensify. So why are these countries emitting so much plastic? A big part of the answer is in waste management. We think the waste management in a lot of these countries is inadequate, and where we've done some work in Indonesia, we think about 60% of the urban population have access to a waste collection. That might not cover all waste types, it could be infrequent, and especially in Indonesia, we think the onwards treatment of that waste is poor. Coverage rarely is generally worse as well. And the situation is exacerbated by population growth, economic growth, and increasing on-the-go consumption, which is all leading to an acceleration of waste generation, and the infrastructure is not keeping up. This is worsened by the fact that plastic is incredibly durable. It's one of the properties that makes it really useful, but it also means that once an item becomes litter, it's likely to make its way to the ocean one day. In places like Indonesia, extreme weather events like flooding and monsoons increase this flushing effect, meaning that the likelihood of reaching the ocean is increased. Worse still, in some places we've looked at, the general practice is to dispose of waste directly into the river, or burn it partially first and then do the same. A changing waste composition with an increasing amount of plastic and decreasing amount of organic or biodegradable waste means that's much more of an issue. So we're about finding solutions, and I'm going to run through a few examples of policy interventions we look at. So extended producer responsibility, or EPR, looks to place the burden of the cost of waste management on the person, producer, or organisation who placed that item on the market. So these are big brands who are producing items and selling them. And these schemes can be designed so that it becomes in the producer's interest to increase the capture of their item in waste collection. They also provide key financial support to underfunded waste management systems. There are also policies which don't rely heavily on waste infrastructure, and deposit refund systems are one example. So a small fee is paid when you purchase an item, and that gets refunded when the item is returned for recycling. And we can design these in really clever ways, such that they incorporate the existing informal waste sector in the countries I've mentioned. So that's people who make a living from collecting recyclables and then selling them back to reprocessors. There are are also quick wins to be had, things that we'd suggest starting tomorrow. These include bans on the most problematic or least essential items and where non-plastic alternatives already exist. There are also charges to reduce consumption of items, which can be really successful, as we've seen in the plastic bag charge in the UK. The picture is a little bit more complicated. Waste is a globally traded item, and the UK exports recyclables for reprocessing elsewhere, as do many other countries. Until the start of this year, the majority of our plastic was going to China, but a change in legislation restricted massively what we can send there, and the result has been a shift in end destination. We're now seeing a large amount of our plastic going to other countries in Asia for reprocessing. And something we could do about this would be to look at reflecting the environmental cost of primary production in the market cost of plastic. This would encourage producers to use recycled materials and drive domestic demand for recycling, and sort of limiting the capacity for export. So this figure basically shows the picture that I've just described. On the left-hand side, we've got the first half of 2017, and on the right, the first half of 2018. So between 2017 and 18, the amount sent to China of plastic reduced to 5% of what it was. And countries like Vietnam and Malaysia, and also Indonesia, made up a big part of that shortfall, with the increase in plastic going to Malaysia being almost 4 times that what was sent in 2017. There's a Greenpeace report called Unearthed, and that basically looks at where these plastics might be ending up and suggests that a lot of them are going to illegal waste sites. So just a few final comments from me. I'd like to recognise that not all waste is plastic, and other waste ending up in the ocean is also a problem. None of what I've just said undermines the value of action in the UK. Prevention of these plastics getting into rivers in the first place is key. Policy we develop here can be transferred elsewhere, and there's definitely space for that example. Finally, the data I've talked through is all based on assumptions and models. It reflects the picture that we think is out there, but it might not be exactly right. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Oh, that is me. I didn't know there was going to be a slide of me. We skipped straight on. That isn't me. It was actually a surfer called Celine Garrett who did that a few years ago. I got lambasted for this photo a little bit when we first brought it out. People thought there'll never be that much plastic in the ocean, and sure enough, we're seeing this sort of picture more and more. Of course, you won't come out to sea covered in plastic, but we are seeing beaches littered with plastic like this, not just the rivers abroad. We did at one stage think about changing our name to Surfers Against Plastic, but the acronym's not so good, so we started Surfers Against Sewage. I wanted to actually, thanks Alice for that really great presentation. I wanted to sort of talk about rivers and go right back to the sewage issue really, because of course, you know, that's where we started. I had the good fortune a year or so ago to go down the main sewer in London, the Blackfriars sewer, with 2 Daily Mail journalists and some MPs. It was one of the best Monday mornings I've ever had. I went into the bowels of London and saw this incredible brickwork that stands to this day, which was built in response to the Great Stink of London in 1858. This is a cartoon from the time, the silent highwayman paddling the Thames and claiming lives. The Thames was riddled with sewage. It was a hugely contaminated and polluted river, and it was really driving Londoners crazy. It was killing people, it was compromising how people were living their lives, and it was driving politicians out of the Houses of Parliament. My understanding is that the long summer recess that they have today is thanks to the Great Stink of London, which made it unbearable to live and work in the centre of London at that time. And so people were really unhappy in London. They were sick of being sick of this sewage and this pollution that was going into the Thames, and they were starting to make their anger felt, and the politicians were feeling that anger too. So they passed new legislation to build this amazing new sewer system that Joseph Bazalgette built that stands and functions to this day. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about the importance of the movement of people driving the need for new systemic change, new legislation and government policy that actually solves an issue. So we saw huge investment in the London sewage issue back in the middle of the 19th century that really cleaned up the Thames dramatically. This was another cartoon from the time, which made me think about the plastic pollution issue. Now, as I was walking through these tiny little tunnels in the bowels of London, I noticed that the walls were also covered with tiny little fragments of coloured, what I thought were sort of microbes and spores, but actually, on closer inspection, it was tiny fragments of plastic pollution, microplastics, that are in all of our waterways today. And this is a cartoon from the time that talked about the monster soup of London, the bacteria and the pathogens in the Thames. And now we're seeing similar sorts of microscopic analysis of our waterways, showing the plastic pollution that is so endemic to every single body of water that we have today. So, of course, legislation has drove that clean-up of the Thames. And then legislation has driven a huge clean-up of our waterways since 1990. SAS were, of course, really a huge part of the campaigning advocacy around that. But actually, what really forced the water companies to act was huge bits of legislation that came in from Europe, namely the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, a fairly boring piece of legislation constructed in Brussels that actually forced water companies to invest millions and millions of pounds in cleaning up their act. And so we've seen a massive improvement in water quality, from 27% of our bathing waters passing in 1990 to now almost 100% of our bathing waters passing. But now, during that same period of time, we've seen the explosion in plastic pollution. And Alice talked about the blue planet too, and we've all seen this issue brought into our households. I was lucky enough to give a talk with the executive producer just a few weeks ago, James Honeyborn, and what stuck with me the most was that out of 7 hours of broadcasting, only 14 minutes was dedicated to plastic pollution. 14 minutes that changed how companies are acting, 14 minutes that changed how politicians are responding to this, and 14 minutes that are changing the lives of NGOs and campaign groups around the country. And it's no surprise we've got a plastic pollution crisis. Another shocking statistic that sticks with me is that between 2002 and 2012, more plastic was created than in all of history before that. So it's no wonder that we've got whales, dolphins, and other enigmatic wildlife washing up dead, their stomachs filled with plastics. So how have we responded? Of course, we do beach cleanups. We mobilise hundreds of thousands of people across our years to take part in beach cleans. It's great, we can pick up a lot of plastic. Every piece of plastic we remove from the beach is a victory, but we can't pick our way out of the problem. Legislation and systemic change will be what we need. And we've got the only marine conservation focused all-party parliamentary group in Westminster. We used that as part of the introduction of the plastic bag legislation. We've already seen the statistics from that. Over 9 billion plastic bags eliminated from circulation. That's an 85% reduction in our supermarkets. It would take volunteers a long time to pick up 9 billion plastic bags. And we're now on to the other piece of systemic change we're looking at. Deposit return systems. We delivered 330,000 signatures to Downing Street last year. The government's committed to introducing a deposit return system. This is a proven mechanism to trap plastic in the economy rather than on our beaches and in our rivers. So these things can really work. We need legislation, we need policy, we need that pressure to be put on the businesses that are creating this stuff. Now, I agree that not all of the plastic pollution is originating from here, but it is big global business that is driving the production of these single-use plastics and putting them on the market, whether that's in China, other countries, whether that's here. And we need the systems to hold them to account and make them pay for the full life cycle of the products and the profits that they're making these days. And that's me, because we want plastic-free coastlines, ultimately. So thank you very much.
Right, hello everyone. I feel a bit overawed by these two amazing presentations. I'm going to be a little bit more off the cuff than that. They're amazing work that both these guys are doing. I mean, there's something also that happened this week which has kind of completely blown me out of the water, because I was going to talk about the 2-minute beach clean movement, and thoughts and the whole point of the 2-minute beach clean being that everyone's got 2 minutes to make a difference, and that every 2 minutes does make a difference. So the thing I usually say is, look, I don't want to be the one that walks past the piece of rope on the beach that goes on to wrap itself around a seal's neck. I don't want to do that. I also don't want to be the one that walks past a piece of plastic in the street that goes down into the sewage system and ends up on the beach and ends up as 1,000 pieces of microplastic. I don't want to be the one that walks past that. But I was going to talk about that, and I was going to talk about the birth of the 2-minute beach clean movement and how we've seen hashtags coming in from all over the world, including Antarctica, with the idea that this sort of personal responsibility is how we'll solve this issue. But something happened this week that was quite extraordinary. This picture of me, look. I'm actually wearing the same t-shirt. Anyway, so could we have the first slide, please? So this is my book, No More Plastic. I wrote it last year as a response to what had happened with the 2-minute beach clean movement, because we realised that actually 2-minute beach clean, as Hugo says, that beach cleaning is a sticking plaster. Someone said that to me a long time ago, and I was quite offended because I just thought, well, hang on a second, we are making a difference. But actually, we're picking stuff up at the end of its life, and we're taking it out of the marine environment where it's a problem. We need to stop it from going into the marine environment. So we came up with the 2-minute litter pick. Now, we started off with these beach clean stations in Bude in Cornwall, which allow people to borrow litter pickers and bags. And we started off with 8 of them. We now have 540 of them around the country, and in Ireland they're on every blue flag beach in Ireland, and they basically enable people to do a 2-minute beach clean. This isn't enough. You know, we need to go upstream. So the 2-minute litter pick, we started to develop boards with Dartmoor National Park so that they could encourage people to do a 2-minute litter pick, 2-minute street clean. But also the idea that came back for this book is the 2-minute solution. So the idea that everybody can make a difference in 2 minutes. So plastic water bottle, your metal water bottle, your refillable, it might be a pain to remember it and it might be difficult, but it's only that much extra work, and it will make a difference, because if you drink a bottle of water every day of your working life at work, 270 plastic bottles a year is what you'll probably use. You buy one reusable, you use one bottle, and you will save yourself a small fortune, as we know. And the refill movement, which was born in Bude and then came to life here in Bristol, proves that you know, millions upon millions of plastic bottles can be saved from going into the environment by people using refillable bottles. So what happened this week was quite extraordinary, because this book is all about no more plastic. It's the most environmentally friendly book that has appeared on the UK market this year. No plastic in there, apart from a little bit in the glue. We could not avoid it. But, next slide. Okay. So this is a tweet that we got a couple of days ago from the States. So someone has been importing the book to the States. There's no distribution rights in the States. Someone has been reselling. We don't know who put it in plastic, but it's being shrink wrapped in plastic. And it kind of, it just tells me something, a really, really strong message that supports everything that everybody's doing, and even what Finisterre are doing here. That we need to wake up. We need to just, for goodness sake. So someone in a warehouse somewhere has seen this book and gone, no more plastic, all right, chuck it through the plastic machine. You know, and we've got this relationship with plastic, which we don't really, we're disconnected from the city to the ocean sometimes. So I was in a bookshop in Bradford, and there was a lady wrapping up books in plastic, and I said, why are you wrapping them up in plastic? Oh, everyone likes books to be really clean when they buy them. They don't want them to be messy. They don't want them to be thumbed, so we wrap them in plastic. So I said, God, that's amazing, isn't it? What on a plastic, we've got this incredible plastic problem. Has it not occurred to you that, you know, this plastic that you're putting on these books will end up in the ocean? And she said, yeah, I know, we have a terrible, terrible problem with plastic. As she was wrapping it up, she said, someone should do something about it. She's wrapping these books. It's you, it's me, it's all of us. And we are absolutely sleepwalking into oblivion. And, you know, there are times come that perhaps taking your reusable coffee cup to work with you isn't going to be enough. So going into work and saying, guys, we're sending stuff out in plastic, that's where we need to be coming from. Each and every one of us has a massive responsibility. If you're the CEO of a company, you have a massive responsibility to your employees, to the people you sell stuff to. And if you're, I don't know, whatever you do, whatever it is you do, we need to open our eyes and have a look, because sure enough, whatever happens upstream will end up downstream. And you know, so there might be huge amounts of plastic coming out of China, but our behaviour here will make a difference. We know from the 2-Minute Beach Clean app that 7 items, which are bottle tops and lids, drinks bottles, drinks, straws, plastic cutlery, crisp packets and sweet wrappers, cotton buds, plastic bags and wet wipes, they make up almost a third of beach litter recorded by people using the 2-Minute Beach Clean app. Each and every one of us can drop those today. Service Against Sewage are working really hard to do that across the country. And if we all do that, we can potentially cut out a third of beach litter. So making that connection is the next vital step. How we live will dictate how our children will live. Yeah, we don't know who it is. We're going to try and talk to them and say, please stop. You know, and then maybe they'll stop wrapping all their books. And maybe all the book distributors will stop wrapping all their books. And you know, I'll shout as loud as I can about it until things change. And I hope you guys will, because you have the power. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.